That's important as well. And as Karen mentioned, an enrollment extravaganza is going to be important for us so that we all come together. We're thinking at Houston Stadium. We have a big enrollment campaign coming up in the summertime to invite previous scholars and new scholars into the district. And we're going to do this with all of our schools having a table, with having a few bounce houses and some things that will excite our families in the community. Our board has been fighting for things like this. Our board is concerned with making sure that we're doing things in the community to bring the community back. And so we're excited for the opportunity to do so. I think your hand was up, and then
I have actually a three-part question to my one part.
okay, we might have to re-ask. So
Right.
All right, on the question of the restoring the steps, does it mean that the agreement that was previously made is going to be carried out? And secondly, does that also mean that next year you'll be actually having 3 steps instead of 2? My second part is on the question of state funding. The ESSR emergency funding is going to be ending in September. This is creating a huge crisis throughout the entire country. I just saw an article report that Michigan is expecting to lose 5,000 teachers. How are you planning to deal with that?
mm-hmm. Thanks, good questions. So to talk a little bit to your first question, and then Karen, I'll give it over to you. But to talk a little to your first question, when you think about the contract that the teachers already have, there were already several steps in that contract. And when you talk about this agreement is a settlement agreement. The contract was not opened up. This was a settlement agreement. So there's a difference between their contract and then some TA items that needed to be settled, okay? And so when you lump it together, I think that at the end of it all, you're saying, yes, there's going to be 3 steps, but those steps are within the contract, and the settlement agreement has made the teachers whole. And so it's a little bit different than the contract. It's from teachers that have been frozen, that now they have received monies, but they haven't received monies commensurate with their years of service in Flint Community Schools. And now we've done that with the settlement agreement. So I hope that helps that first part. But the second part is ESSER. When you talk about ESSER 3, we know that September 30th, all ESSER funds, it's over. If you don't have those funds allocated, there's some wiggle room for certain things, but they have to all be allocated. Flint Community Schools is completely allocated. ESSER, we did not use ESSER 3 for new hires. We didn't do that. We did that on purpose, because if you hire someone through ESSER money, you're going to have to pick that up in your general account after ESSER is gone. We wanted to utilize ESSER for the restricted reasons that it's used for, which we wanted to use it for renovating. As you know, that Flint Community Schools has not had a new building of any sorts for since the early 70s or so. And so we wanted to renovate our schools. The board thought that the scholars that were in our district at this time, and our administration, we believe that it's right to do right by the scholars we serve. And so we used ESSER 3 mostly to do renovations. And then we used it to supplant our wages, benefits, and legacy costs for staffing. So we used it, and yes, when it's gone, we're going to have to pick up whatever it is that's going to be coming at us forward from September 30th. How do we see that? I think that what we've done here in this historic settlement is we've placed ourselves in a position to compete with other districts as it pertains to teacher salaries. If you did any work around finding out where Flint Community Schools lands in the state, we are not far from competition. We are not in, it's about 600 school districts. We're somewhere around the 170, 180 area as it pertains to competing with our salaries. So when you look at that, that means that there is way more schools out there or districts out there that's paying less money to teachers. So I believe that in itself will help us to grow and help us to move into the future as it pertains to bringing in new staff.
Karen,
And then we'll go to Harold.
can you talk a little bit about the 4% that's rejected this when it comes from the union's perspective? Do you know why they said no to the settlement agreement?
No, we were not given an absolute answer as to why the original was turned down. So I can't give you an answer to that particular part of, anything, but once the explanation of how all of the numbers turned out made it so that people were able to understand it better. My personal feeling is I think that there was some confusion in the actual data to begin with. I think once we solidified numbers and we were all on the same page where numbers were, it made a big difference so that people could see everything. But to back up to your question that you asked a minute ago, it's not just like 1 or 2 or 3 steps. There are some people who have been frozen on step 2 for 10 years. So they get moved to where they are in with their experience in the Flint schools. So those of us at the top would only get that additional 1 step for this year, but those that have been working their way through the pay scale who've been frozen over 10 years would actually move a whole lot more than those of us who have been at the top in order to keep our younger teachers who are moving through the scale to stay here. We don't want to lose them to districts that are offering more, and in this way these teachers are restored back to where they should be on the salary schedule, which honors them and their time in this district to keep them here and for them not to leave to go to other places. So some people may get 1 step, some people may get 2, but there are other people who are going to get more than just 1 or 2 steps.
Harold.
Superintendent Jones, you brought up the issue of buildings, and the number of buildings you have, of course, has an impact on your budget and your ability to pay your staff, including your teachers. You have been told by the state, by auditing firms, and by members of your own administrative team that you have twice the number of buildings that you need for your student population. That has to take a toll on a budget that is already stretched. It's been at least since 2017 that this district has closed the building. That's 7 going on 8 years. I wonder if you would comment about the need to right-size this district for the number of students that you have when your staff is spread all over these 11 buildings. When they could be concentrated in fewer buildings, you'd have more financial resources to compensate them.
Thank you, Harold, for that question. The work has begun. We've begun the work as it pertains to coming up with a plan, a phased approach for repurposing buildings. And when we say repurpose, we choose to say repurpose because our community has had an outcry for not just closing these buildings and leaving them vacant. So when we talk about repurposing, we are talking about closing in the same breath. So I will say that the board has already started that process as it pertains to making a decision to close 4 buildings in 3 years. How that looks, we're still working on some of that process. We need to get a little bit more aggressive. The board has spoken to me about that, and we've spoken about what the repurposing will look like. There's some things on the table we can't really discuss at the moment that we're working on as it pertains to repurposing. But we're also looking at, Harold, we're also looking at the work around building a high school. Our issue that we're facing, yes, we have building issues, but we also need new enrollees to come back to Flint Community Schools. And I think that sometimes we're focusing on just the closures or the vacant properties when we also need to focus on enrollment campaigns and bringing in a new high school for our scholars, which we're working on right now. And if we can get our scholars to come back to us, and be a part of Flint Community Schools, then that is a whole nother story of how the landscape for Flint Community Schools will look. But currently, right now, there is a plan in place. There is buildings that are already slated to be closed or to be repurposed, and we're in that process right now. It is important to do. It is important to do. We do not need to just keep properties for the sake of keeping properties. I don't think that is the direction of the board, to just keep properties. I know that they're not making any more land, and we are looking at that as well. What are we going to do with our land? We don't want to just give land out. We want to make sure it's repurposed in a way that is going to bring prosperity to this community and to take a lot of the pollution out of the community. And so it is a process, it is work, it's going to take some time, but I think that we have started that process, and the board has talked about that several times at the table and have made some very hard decisions as it pertains to closing neighborhood schools, and we're doing that now. Do you have a follow-up?
Two quick follow-ups.
Then we're going to come to you.
That is, have you been too slow to the starting line for this? Because you've known for years and years what was happening with enrollment, and that you needed to right-size the district. And I say you, plural, all of Flint school leaders. And the other one is, you speculate that that's part of the reason why Flint was passed over by the state of Michigan with a piece of December legislation that provided debt relief for 6 other school districts in the state of Michigan.
Okay, so I'm going to answer your last question first. No, I don't believe that it's the actions of the Board of Education or the actions of this district that caused us not to get any debt relief. I think there was specific rules to that and regulations to that debt relief. And your first question was?
Were you slow to begin
Thank
the
you.
process
Got it.
as a district?
Got it.
And I'm not talking just about Superintendent
I understand.
Jones. I'm talking about all of the leadership
I understand.
team.
I would say the district over the last 15 years has been slow to the draw in making decisions. And now that you have a board and a superintendent and the teachers union and others that are standing together to try to fix what has been broken over the years, we're all playing behind the 8 ball, right? It's all too slow. It's been too slow, but we have to make the right decisions while we have the opportunity. So I'm going to say, to answer you, it's been overdue for us to make the right decisions for Flint kids. But we also have to keep in mind that the fiscal responsibility of this district has been a roller coaster for many years. And the teachers wouldn't be where they are if it wasn't a roller coaster. So we're fixing what we can fix to do what's best for the community and the scholars we serve, and so it's going to take some time. Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking if you could speak to the state funding issue and explain sort of how state funding has contributed to a lot of these issues from both a teacher's perspective and your perspective as superintendent. And what can the state do in terms of funding to help Flint?
So I think that the first thing that happened was several years ago when the governor, before our governor that we have now, decided to cut state funding for all the school districts. And when that happened, it put a lot of school districts into deficit funding and into deficit spending because they didn't take into consideration what is needed in certain areas, especially when you have certain areas that have water crises and other issues that happen. More should have been attributed to this district, which it did not happen. At that particular moment, by the time he got into his 3rd year of being governor, all of a sudden there was a big thing, oh, we've given this great amount of money to all the public schools. No, you just gave back what you cut. You didn't give us more. We're still behind because you still didn't completely fund it back to where it was originally before you took all the money away. It caused a lot of inner city schools, a lot of inner city districts, a lot of urban districts, a lot of our children that are in Black and brown communities to not be able to have the funding that is needed to make the school districts run the way they need to run. What needs to happen, and which has been happening over the last few years with Governor Whitmer, as we have been giving more and more money to state funding for students at each district level, and that needs to continue to happen, especially with those districts that have been hurt the most, in order to be able to get the funding back up so that there is funding to be able to have a well-rounded educational community in the schools that we're where we are. Did that help you?
Yeah, fine. You want me to speak to that? So I would say it's a lot that the state can do to support, but I'm going to speak to that, but then I'll also say Flint does receive grant funds. We receive over $20 million a year in different grants. However, those grants are restricted. Like I stated last week, we would not even have the conversation of how we're going to pay teachers, how we're going to pay principals or parapros or whoever, if I was able to use those funds in a way that 40%, maybe 40%, and I'm just throwing out numbers, those, 35%, 40% of their salaries, legacy costs can be paid through some of the state funding or the federal funding. Now, why is that key? It's key because those funds are restricted to support at-risk students, right? And so when you talk about the title funds, when you talk about 31A funds, those funds are for at-risk students. We are a district that we're full of at-risk students, right? God bless their heart, we love them, but we're 100% free and reduced. So when you talk about how can they help, the number one intervention is the teacher that's living and breathing in front of our scholars. So if those funds are for interventions, we're looking at an intervention, living and breathing, that can talk to the student, not a book, although she has all these books in her mind, but she can help. And I think that a good use of state funding would be to allow us to pay our staff through those funds. And hey, we're a traditional school, a public school. We're not in it for the money. We're in it to educate. We are Flint Community Schools. We're in it to educate scholars, right? So there's no privatization of anything that we receive. We're in it to help our scholars, all right? And so in order to do that, we need funding. We need more funding. Our scholars have suffered a lot. So have our teachers, so have our principals, so have our staff, and this board, and the boards before there. And I'm not saying that the folks that came before me in this board has done everything wrong, but I will say that through all of the changes that have taken place in Flint Community Schools over the last 10 to 15 years, you can't say things have worked in succinct and perfectly. And there's been holes. And so we're here joined together. And I can say all 7 board members work well with the superintendent to ensure that we're doing all we can to service Flint together. It's not always easy. We don't always agree. Me and Karen don't always agree. But we sure can sit down and eat some Jimmy John's and talk it through.
We can.
Right? And the same thing with this Board of Education. We are now at a place that if we continue to work together, we can figure out what buildings need to be repurposed, what vacant properties need to be either sold off or leased off, or whatever the board is going to decide. We are at a place where we can do this work because there is no animosity going between what the administration and the board or the teachers union. We don't have to do this type of linear fighting. We can fight together to do what's best for students. I want to go with her and then I'll come back to you. Yes, ma'am.
So this process of getting to this settlement has been difficult and emotional. I'd like you to speak about what you hope this settlement agreement, what message it sends to the teachers.
Yes.
And Karen, if you could talk about the reaction and what message has been received.
So when you're going through something like this, you almost got me. You almost got a tear. You almost got a tear because it has been emotional. It's been emotional for myself, all 7 of these board members behind me. It's been emotional for my team. It's been emotional for the teachers. Everyone, principals had to deal with this. scholars, families. It's been a roller coaster, but it's because we are not only thinking about right now, we're thinking about the future. And we don't want to be a district that is only thinking about one group, and we're only thinking about how this makes me look in the moment. Forget that. It's all about the scholars. And when we think about having a school for my children or your children to come to, or someone's grandchild to come to, I have to think about that the decisions that the superintendent and the board is making right now, is it going to help those that come after me, or is it going to make more work for them? And so I wanted to make sure that we came back to the table to think about how can we collaborate in a way that the district in itself gets more out of its teaching staff, gets more out of the district leaders, gets more out of the Board of Education. Everyone wins in this situation. And so going back to the table needed to happen so that we can collaborate and get more out of all of this for our scholars. So it's been a roller coaster, but I think that this was necessary in retrospect for us to be able to get to where we are today. And no, I didn't want our teachers to have to go through that, but it was great for us to hear our teachers. I think every board member behind me will agree that it was great hearing every comment that we heard from our teachers. It gave us an opportunity. Yes, I visit classrooms. Yes, the board members visit buildings, but it gave us an opportunity to hear the heart. And yes, we hear from Karen. Yes, we hear from Bruce, but we heard from teachers that we normally don't hear from. Teachers like Christy Gatz. It was important. Teachers like Heather Nassar, who text me, and teachers like LaShonda Warren, the teachers that came forward. We hear you, we heard you, and this board has heard you, and we were thankful that we were able to go back to the table. It took some work. It took some work. We were able to go back to the table. We had those moments where we said, oh, come on, man, we're close. We had those moments, but those moments matter, and those moments are important because we're thinking and we're trying to do what's best for our scholars.
So on the same note, it was a major roller coaster of emotions with the teachers and having different conversations with different. It took us a while to have conversations with them to tell them it's okay to tell your story, because a lot of times we want to keep our trauma buried to ourselves and we don't want to share our trauma. But sharing trauma is the best way that we can work through a problem and actually get to a solution that works for everyone. So some of those teachers that came in and bared their stories here and told us everything about what was going on would never have done that before this moment, but they felt that this was the moment and the time was now, that it was important that their story be told. And after they were able to tell their stories, they felt like they were finally heard, which was a big thing. And we tell them all the time, Bruce and I talk all the time, but they need to hear from you. They can't just always hear just from me. And so getting them to the point where they felt comfortable to be able to share their story, and knowing that this administration is not an administration that if you tell my story, I'm going to be in your classroom the next day to give you a hard time. That's not how this administration runs. We've had administrations in the past that have run that way. This one does not. People actually took what teachers had to say to heart. They listened to their stories, understood the trauma that they have been through, as well as the trauma that their students have been through, and it made a difference to allow us to get back to the table to reach the collaboration that we did to get the settlement agreement that we all agreed with, what we thought would be the best for this district to move forward. So it was, and teachers are still moving through that trauma as they still continue to tell their stories and to reach out to us to let us know what they've been going through. So it was a good overall lesson to learn that we really need to make sure that we're hearing from our staff as well as community members as well as students, because sometimes our staff aren't willing to give their story. But I think we've opened that up now so that people will be more willing to share their trauma, so that people can share in how can we help you.
And I would just add this piece to it. Sometimes too, when you want to say something to a teacher, and when you're in the midst of a settlement agreement or you're in the midst of some type of negotiation, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't talk about full details when you want to. Sometimes people will reach out to the board members and they want the board members to just tell them what they need to hear. We can't do that. We can't talk about things in the midst of negotiations. And sometimes people would say that that's not transparency. Well, I can't be transparent in the midst of negotiations about what's happening behind closed doors. It's not the right thing to do. We need to make sure that when we come back to everyone, we're giving them the right information. And sometimes we're going to have to take the hit as the administration, as the Board of Education, of what people are currently thinking about us. Because it's not true that the Board of Education or the administration does not care about teachers. It's never been true that the administration or the board were working separately. But we can't talk about all those details during some of these matters. And so when you don't see us responding, it doesn't mean that we don't care. It means that we have to find the right time. We have to work things out. And then we'll come back and we'll let everyone know where we are once things are settled with our teachers' union. Same thing with any other union. There's going to be times when we don't agree, and we may have folks come to the microphone to say what they need to say. The administration is not going to go tit for tat with any union because we want to do what's right and we all care. We're going to take maybe 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap this up because we do have a board meeting and a closed session coming up. So
Dylan, he was next.
I did tell Dylan. So after Dylan, there's going to be 2 more questions. So okay, one here, and then we'll do some final statements, and then we'll wrap that up. Dylan.
I just want to know if you feel that there's a level of trust that has to be rebuilt sort of after the settlement agreement saga is over with the teachers and the community.
So there's going to always be levels of trust. I think that the teachers union and the administration, we have a level of trust. I don't think that there is an issue when it comes to there's levels to things, right? There's things that you can trust when it comes to some of your scholars or some folks, and then there's things that you have to wait on, right? But I do think that we have a level of trust that we can work and move things forward. This collaboration and this tentative agreement didn't come without nail biting, but it came with collaboration and the ability to know that when I sit down with Karen, when I sit down with Bruce, and when they sit down with our administration, we're all trying to do what's best at the end of the day. Whether we see it differently or not, we're all trying to do what's best in some way, shape, or form. So there is a level of trust there, but I think that there's levels to trust that I'm going to continue to try to build that trust with Karen, continue to build that trust with Bruce. But I think right now we can go get a steak right now and be just fine and have a great time and not have to worry about the word trust. I think right now we can have the conversations about how we're moving into the future and really not have a concern of trust in that work. So I think that there's levels to trust. So that's my answer to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you want to piggyback
I was going to
off
say,
that?
we even today we had joint labor management, and there were a couple of issues that we didn't agree on, but it was okay because each side got their point across. And then from that point on, it's just like, let's make plans to figure out how we can work on this a little bit more. Trust, I don't think, is the issue. I think it's more along the issue of open communication was the biggest problem. I think we solved a lot of that through these 16 hours of negotiations.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Karen, you touched on this a little bit, but can you talk about just what the biggest benefits are, in your opinion, for teachers in this new agreement?
Sure. Our teachers will be restored, which is the big thing, which will allow this district to allow new teachers to come in at higher levels than where they were, which is what we need. We need newer teachers into the district. We've had several teachers in the past few years that have tried to come into the district, but because of the way the contract read, they had to be placed at step number 1, no matter what kind of experience they had, and they couldn't go past anyone who was frozen. So at this point, no one will be frozen anymore, so that they can hire teachers in at their level of experience. So if they have 3 years at a different district, they can come in here and be hired in at 3 or 4. depending upon if the district wants to give them the 3, and then this would be the 4. But it allows us as the older teachers in the district, I'm going to say experienced teachers in the district, to be able to train some of the new teachers coming in so that we can give them our experience to be able to understand how to work in inner city schools and how to create those relationships with parents and with students, so that we make this district even better than what it is right now. That's part of the biggest part of it, is just making sure that our teachers were made whole, so that we didn't feel like the district would try to hire somebody in over someone who'd been frozen for so many years, which was the biggest concern that we had. So that's the biggest take from this. But being able to work collaboratively with the district in order to be able to do these days leading up to the moving into the traditional calendar, to make sure that we are part of the plan in bringing in students to this district is a big thing. Also in helping in recruiting. So our goal now is to hit the ground running and try to recruit teachers to our district along with students.
Actually,
Yes, sir, last question.
The last answer actually maybe answered part of my question. It was about the fact that I think the number of teachers is that 40% of the teachers in some of the buildings were paraprofessionals. They were not full-time teachers. So how are we planning to deal with that?
Actually, in our schools, the classrooms that don't have certified teachers in them, they were guest teachers in our district. They were not paraprofessionals.
Correct.
Paraprofessionals are totally different classification. We have a guest teacher program that teachers have been working through a teacher program in order to work towards their certification. And so if they were a direct hire from the Flint schools, they were actually a guest teacher working through a teacher preparation program working towards certification. So some of them are actually working through getting ready to take their test, or have already taken their test and have, once they take the test and get their certification as a teacher, they then are directly hired as from the date of when they came into the teacher program to allow them the years of service that they had for that. We don't have any paraprofessionals that are teachers in the classroom.
So we're also working with a program called Talent Together that the state has released funding for, where we are working to get, it's sort of like a grow your own program where you are, if there's staff members that want to become teachers, to answer someone's earlier question, we do have a program that we're working on now with the state of Michigan called Talent Together. So if anyone is interested in becoming a teacher, that helps fund that. And so there's a road to certification that's out there for those that are either parapros or have, you may not have the certification, but you have the credits. This will help you get to that space. We need that. We're even trying to encourage some of our scholars that are seniors to go into education and trying to make ways for them to be able to come back to the district to serve. So I want to wrap this up with a final statement, and I want to say, save, I guess, this for the last. Fiscal responsibility is most important to the Board of Education and this administration. And the Board of Education set aside $1.5 million to support this restoration. The $1.5 million have covered the restoration in itself. It's about 1.3, somewhere around $1.3 million. So it helps to just restore. But as you speak about how do we pay for things moving forward, you're not paying $1.3 million every year moving forward extra. What we're paying moving forward is the steps increases for our teachers, which if we continue to move in this plan to right-size the district, that will support that. Yes, we are working in a deficit. That's where we bring in the idea of the phased approach and excelling that process so that we can move that projected deficit down. We're going to need support from our state. We're going to need support from those that work for government to support us getting there. Flint Community Schools we will do our work. We're doing our work. The Board of Education is in workshops. We're in policy meetings. They're forming meetings so that we can talk about the phased approach and how we're going to tackle that. In the meantime, the administration is going to continue to work to figure out our organizational charting, meaning how we're paying staff. If there's possible ways to pay staff through grants, we're going to do that. But remember, we're going to do that responsibly, and those funds are restricted, so we only can do it in a certain way. We're looking at that now. The administration has scheduled 4-hour Friday meetings to only work on that work. And so we are busy doing that work. The board is busy doing their work. We're talking to policymakers to figure out how to get funding to Flint, and there is ways. They're talking to us. The state is not totally quiet. There's folks that have met with the superintendent that's trying to figure out ways to help. Yes, we need to speed up that process, and the board has met with folks in the state, and they're meeting with legislators outside the state to try to figure out how to bring in funding. We can't always talk about those things and tell everyone everything that we're doing, because most times people think that transparency is putting the cart, they want you to put the cart before the horse. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put the cart before the horse. I'm going to try to work things out with the Board of Education and those that are policymakers, and then we'll let folks know what's going on. I can't put ourselves in a situation to where our young people get put on a back burner because we're putting out information before it's been approved. And I want to make sure that that's clear to everyone, that the superintendent and this Board of Education, we can't just be out here talking. We can't just be out here saying what's going to happen. We can demand, we can talk about what's necessary for Flint kids, but we have to do it in a way that is appropriate and professional. And we're using that word trust. We have trust, and we're using trust to move Flint forward. So that's our plan. That's what we're doing. We have an approach. We have a plan. We have a strategic plan, and we're working that plan. So we thank you for your time. I want to say again to our teachers union and our Board of Education, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time. Every single one of the teachers that sat here and came and gave their time to talk to us, to talk to the Board of Education, thank you. And for those that did not come, we still heard you and we still hear you. For the parents that worked with us throughout this process, for the scholars that wanted to know what was going on and how you're going to fix it. Well, we have fixed it, and we're thankful for the opportunity to continue to serve Flint. And I would like to thank every board member that sit behind me, that took the shots, that took all of the phone calls. When you couldn't say anything, you tried to do your very best to console and help our teachers through this process. So thank you. And lastly, I would like to say thank you to this administrative team for all your hard work and the efforts that you put in to ensure that our numbers were correct and we move things forward. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. If you all want to get a picture with the Board of Education and our UTF leaders, if the board doesn't mind, okay, we can just stand up and get a picture together. We can come back there.
You want us to go back there?